She was an OnlyFans star in Miami, living a glamorous life, until she allegedly plunged a knife into her boyfriend's chest. Was it self-defense as she's claiming, or was it something far darker? This is a Courtney Clenney case. This OnlyFans model was accused of stabbing her boyfriend Christian Obumsley to death in her Miami apartment back in 2022. She's claiming self-defense after what everyone else agrees was really a volatile relationship. But prosecutors say the evidence points to her as the aggressor in a pattern of escalating violence. The trial is finally locked in for April 27, 2026, after multiple delays, and she's still sitting in custody without bond. It's a messy and high-profile case with layers and layers around control, anger, and exactly what happens when things spiral completely out of control. All right, let's jump in. Another case, another clinical file. The most striking mental health indicator in this case is the extreme escalation of aggression in a relationship marked by repeated physical confrontations, where one partner claims self-defense after a fatal knife wound, yet the history shows patterns of mutual volatility that went unchecked. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and in this episode of The Clinical File, I'll examine the mental health indicators and psychological layers of the Courtney Clenney case. This analysis is based on my speculations. It's not a diagnosis of anyone involved in this case. One of the most compelling red flags here is the rapid shift from reported fear and victimization to lethal force in a domestic setting, which raises questions about emotional regulation under intense stress. Emotional dysregulation, the inability to modulate intense feelings like anger or fear, often lies at the core of relationships that repeatedly turn physical. When someone experiences overwhelming emotion, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational decision-making and impulse control, can temporarily go offline, leaving the more primitive fight-or-flight system in charge. In high-conflict couples, this can create a feedback loop. One partner's escalations triggers the others, and without tools like mindfulness and therapy, or even basic timeout strategies, small disagreements ignite into something more dangerous. What happens when unresolved anger and control issues collide in a high-conflict relationship? Stay with me, because by the end, we'll look at how patterns of coercive control, trauma responses, and poor impulse management can create a deadly tipping point, and why recognizing those early signs matters so much in relationships. The latest development came in December 2025 when a Miami-Dade judge set the trial date for April 27, 2026, denied bond again, and refused to dismiss charges again. Clenney faces second-degree murder in the death of Christian Obumsley. Delays stem from prosecutor changes and readiness issues, but she's been in custody without bond since her 2022 arrest, over 3 years now. The events take us to Miami on April 3, 2022, in her luxury Edgewater condo in Miami. Clenney called 911 to report stabbing her boyfriend. She was covered in blood and showed signs of distress on the body cam. Obumsley, 27, had one deep chest stab wound and died at the scene. Clenney, 25 then and known as online as Courtney Taylor, said Obumsley attacked her. She grabbed a kitchen knife in the struggle. The fight reportedly moved from the apartment to the hallway in the elevator. Investigators found prior altercations. Audio captured aggressive language and threats from both. In one recording, Clenney expressed intense frustration and anger toward him. Psychologically, this bidirectional aggression points to shared dysregulation. When both partners lack skills to de-escalate, conflicts follow a predictable arc: verbal buildup, physical posturing, then violence. Insecure attachment, often anxious or avoidant, can fuel this. Anxious types fear abandonment and react with clinginess or rage. Avoidant types withdraw, provoking more pursuit. Over time, the relationship becomes a pressure cooker where neither feels safe, but neither leaves. We lack public info on Clenney's childhood, but chronic relational stress alone can mimic trauma effects, heightening hypervigilance and reducing tolerance for perceived threats. Power control add another dimension here. Friends described Clenney as sometimes jealous or controlling, and Obumsley's family alleged abuse towards him. Coercive control involves intimidation, monitoring, or force to dominate. In self-defense cases, we examine if the final act stems from chronic fear, ongoing threat perception, or acute loss of control, impulsive rage. The single deep wound suggests either targeted force or panic precision. Prosecutors cite timeline inconsistencies and post-stabbing actions as undermining self-defense. Defense evokes battered spouse syndrome via notice of intent. Battered spouse syndrome involves learned helplessness from prolonged abuse. Victims feel trapped, hypervigilant, and may use force preemptively when they believe escape is impossible. Speculatively, if Clenney experienced ongoing fear, this could frame the stabbing as a desperate survival response rather than a premeditated intent. Yet mutual violence muddies this. Both reportedly showed aggression at times, complicating who was the primary victim. We can compare this to the Ashley Benfield case in Florida, where a woman claimed self-defense after shooting her husband, citing years of alleged abuse amid documented mutual volatility. The jury ultimately convicted her of manslaughter in 2023, highlighting how courts scrutinized whether fear was reasonable and ongoing versus situational, or even considered the elements from the Amber Heard Johnny Depp defamation trial, where audio and testimony revealed aggression from both sides, making it difficult for observers to clearly identify a sole primary aggressor without forensic and pattern evidence. Clenney's content creation brought public exposure and unstable income. Arguments often involve social media or infidelity perceptions. Jealousy frequently roots to low self-worth or abandonment fears. When neutral behaviors feel like threats, disproportionate rage follows. This ties to anxious attachment. Fears of loss triggers possessiveness, escalating conflicts. It doesn't justify harm, but it does explain how minor issues can explode in terrible ways. Clenney went to Hawaii after the incident and entered rehab, reportedly for substance issues and processing trauma. Then she was arrested in August 2022 and extradited. Her arrest behavior, distress mixed with memorization and self-focus, some experts call narcissistic traits. Others see trauma response under scrutiny. Overconfidence in narrative can produce inconsistencies investigators exploit. The digital evidence in this case was vast. Lots of text, videos, and posts reveal toxicity. This reminds us that confidence doesn't equal accuracy in high-stakes accounts. If this breakdown of dysregulation spiraling in volatile relationships gave you clarity on spotting red flags early, I'd love to keep bringing you these analyses. Subscribe if you want the next one to land in your feed. That way you'll have the psychological context ready for tough cases. It's free, takes 2 seconds, and it helps me keep making meaningful content. The relationship was passionate yet unstable. Frequent breakups and reconciliations are classic push and pull, often linked to borderline traits or anxious attachment. Obumsley expressed fear in a relationship, but he stayed, which are common in harmful bonds where love, hope, finances, or isolation fears outweigh safety. Clenney maintains innocence and self-defense. The unresolved pending of the April trial, arguments center on intent, fear reasonableness, and force proportionality. The psychological family impact is deep here. Sudden violent loss in domestic context causes complex grief, compounded by scrutiny and delays. The key takeaway here is that boundaries matter. Physical arguments aren't passion. They're danger signals needing intervention. Social media amplifies insecurities. Visibility breeds comparison, fueling jealousy and strained relationships. The wound suggests intent or panic precision, but forensics will be pivotal. If this case gave you insight to manipulation, volatility, trauma shaping outcomes, subscribe to unpack more together. People show terrifying unpredictability when stress overrides reason. The courtroom and evidence will decide Clenney's fate, but clinically, this case illustrates unaddressed mental health needs in intimate partnerships that created this tragedy. Arguments in relationships is not uncommon. It happens a lot. But then when it escalates to this degree, the argument turns into a rage. And what happens is that the nervous system goes into a fight mode, not a flight mode here, but a fight mode. Maybe she felt trapped. Maybe she felt anger. We don't know what was happening. We don't know the actual content of the argument. We just know the outcome. And we know from past reports that this relationship was pretty volatile from the beginning. And it unfortunately ended in this way. Whether Clenney is innocent as she is claiming, self-defense, or whether she did this premeditatedly. What do you think? What do you think about this case? Do you know more about it? To offer your opinions, would love to know more. So what did you think about this? What do you think about intimate partner violence like this? Were there any elements that stood out to you? Well, and that's where we leave the Courtney Clenney case for now. A story that started with passion and ended in tragedy, all because those red flags of control, anger, and emotional regulation never got addressed. Thanks for sticking with me throughout this case. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe.